Picture this. You are running. The forest floor is a treacherous landscape of gnarled roots and slick, damp leaves that conspire to send you tumbling. Every snap of a twig behind you is a thunderclap in your ears, every shadow a monster reaching for you. The air, thin and sharp with the coming of a cruel winter, burns in your lungs. You are lost. Utterly and hopelessly lost. For 3 days, the wilderness has been your unforgiving keeper, and now, the men your guardian sent are closing in. But they are not rescuers. You know, with a cold certainty that settles deep in your bones, that they are hunters, and you are the prey. This is not a mission of salvation. This is a mission of retrieval, and the man who sent them does not tolerate his property wandering off. This was Alara's world. A world shrunken to the size of her own frantic heartbeat. When they finally caught her, crashing through the underbrush with the subtlety of spooked cattle, there was no relief. Only the grim finality of a cage door swinging shut. The men's faces were hard, their grips like iron on her arms. They dragged her not back towards the gaslit streets of the town she loathed, but deeper into the woods, towards the one place everyone knew to avoid, the Blackwood River. And to the man who haunted its banks. Her guardian, Mayor Thorne, was waiting for them on the muddy shore. He was a man carved from ambition and impatience, his tailored coat a stark, offensive black against the rustic chaos of nature. He did not look at her with the concern of a caretaker. He looked at her as a man might look at a prized horse that had thrown its rider and bolted. Annoyance. Disgust. A flicker of cold fury in his eyes. He grabbed her chin, his fingers digging into her skin. You have been a profound disappointment, Alara, he said, his voice a low, controlled hiss. You embarrassed me. You wasted my time and my resources. A lesson is in order. A lesson in gratitude and obedience. He gestured with his head towards a dilapidated cabin hunched by the water's edge, a wisp of smoke curling weakly from its stone chimney. It looked as though it were barely clinging to existence, ready to be swallowed by the dark, churning river at its feet. The door creaked open, and a man emerged, stepping into the dying light of the afternoon. He was tall and broad, a silhouette of raw power against the gray sky. He moved with a heavy, deliberate slowness, and as he drew closer, Alara could see the harsh story written on his face. A long, jagged scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his mouth, pulling his lips into a permanent, somber line. His eyes were the color of the river stones, gray and worn smooth by endless sorrow. This was Silas. The river man. A local legend whispered about in hushed, fearful tones, a brute, a hermit, some said a madman, who had lost his family to the river and his soul along with them. Silas, Mayor Thorne said, his tone dripping with condescending authority. As we discussed. My ward has proven, willful. She requires a firmer hand. A simpler life. To learn the consequences of her actions, he shoved Alara forward, and she stumbled, catching herself just before she fell at Silas's feet. She looked up at the towering man, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her punishment. Not a beating, not a locked room. Banishment. To be given, like a sack of unwanted grain, to this broken giant. She is your responsibility now, Thorne continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Feed her, house her, work her. It makes no difference to me. Consider the debt for your land settled. Keep her until she learns her place, or until the river claims her. I truly don't care which. With that, the mayor turned on his heel, his men falling in behind him. He did not look back. He simply walked away, leaving Alara standing in the suffocating silence, alone with the fearsome river man who was now her keeper. She stared at Silas, bracing for the blow, for the harsh command, for the cruelty she had been promised. But Silas did not move. He simply stood there, his unreadable gray eyes fixed on her, and the only sound was the mournful, ceaseless rush of the river. In the first days, fear was Alara's only companion. She existed in a state of suspended terror, waiting for the monster to reveal himself. Silas gave her a small room at the back of the cabin. It was little more than a closet with a cot, but the door had no lock. He placed a bowl of hot, savory stew on the small table for her that first night, and then retreated to his own side of the cabin, the silence between them as thick and heavy as the river fog outside. He did not speak to her. He barely looked at her. He moved around the small space with a ghost's quiet, his large frame surprisingly graceful. Elara ate the stew, her hunger warring with her fear. It was the first warm meal she'd had in days, and the simple kindness of it was more confusing than any cruelty would have been. Days bled into a week. A routine, unspoken and fragile, began to form. Every morning, Silas would already be gone when she awoke, a piece of hard bread and a strip of dried meat left for her on the table. He would spend his days on the river in a small, sturdy boat, or tending to traps along the banks. She would watch him from the cabin's grimy window, a figure of profound solitude against the vast, wild landscape. He was not the brute of the stories. He was a man encased in a shell of grief so thick it seemed to absorb all sound and light around him. He treated her not like a prisoner, but like a stray animal he was not sure how to handle, providing sustenance and shelter but keeping a careful, respectful distance. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, a violent tempest that threw rain against the cabin like handfuls of gravel. A leak, which had been a slow drip, became a steady stream of icy water directly over Elara's cot. She huddled in the corner, shivering, watching the puddle grow on her thin blanket. Silas entered, shaking the rain from his coat. He saw her, saw the leak, and his expression, for the first time, shifted. It was not pity, but a flicker of something akin to responsibility. Without a word, he went outside into the heart of the storm. For an hour, she heard him on the roof, the sounds of hammering and shifting shingles battling the roar of the wind. When he came back inside, drenched and steaming in the cold air, the leak had stopped. He glanced at her, a single, quick look, and then went to stoke the fire. In that one act, he had shown her more care than Mayor Thorne had in 10 years of guardianship. Slowly, the fortress of her fear began to crumble, replaced by a tentative curiosity. She started leaving the cabin, at first just stepping onto the porch, then venturing to the riverbank. He never stopped her. He began to teach her, in his silent way. He would leave a fishing line, neatly coiled, by the door. He would point out which berries were safe to eat, which roots could be boiled for a stew. He showed her how to read the river, where the current was treacherous, where the fish schooled in the calm eddies. His hands, though large and calloused, were gentle as he showed her how to bait a hook or tie a proper knot. One evening, as they sat on opposite sides of the fire, the silence was finally broken. "The river," he said, his voice rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. "It takes everything. My wife, my daughter." He stared into the flames, his scarred face illuminated, and for the first time, Elara didn't see a monster or a jailer. She saw a man drowning in a memory. "Thorn," he called my grief a weakness. "Took my farmland, the deed my father left me. Said this piece of mud was a fair trade for the debt I owed him after he paid for the burials." The truth settled between them, stark and painful. Silas was not a willing participant in Thorn's cruelty, he was another of its victims. He had accepted her not as a punishment, but because he'd had no choice, another turn of the screw from the man who had already taken everything from him. From that moment, everything changed. She began to speak to him, telling him small things about her life before the woods, about her love of books, about the suffocating loneliness of being Thorn's ward. And he listened. He remained a man of few words, but his silence was no longer empty. It was attentive. It was safe. The small, rickety cabin by the wild river, once her prison, had become the only sanctuary she had ever known. She was not his prisoner. He was not her keeper. They were simply two solitary souls, finding a fragile peace in the shared wilderness of their lives. The seasons turned. The harsh winter gave way to a gentle spring, and the world around the cabin exploded into life. The river thawed, the trees budded, and something inside Alara bloomed alongside them. The fear that had been her constant shadow was gone, replaced by a quiet competence. Under Silas's patient, unspoken tutelage, she had learned the rhythms of this wild place. She could track, fish, and forage. The pallor of fear had left her face, replaced by the healthy glow of the sun and the clear-eyed confidence of survival. She and Silas had found a harmony, a life built on shared tasks and comfortable silences, punctuated by the rare exchange of words that held more weight than entire conversations in her old life. They were not just coexisting, they were a unit. A family of two, forged in hardship and mutual respect. This fragile peace was shattered on a bright, clear morning. The sound was alien here, the crisp, authoritative crunch of expensive boots on the path leading to the cabin. Alara's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. She looked at Silas, his face instantly hardening back into the stone mask he had worn when she first arrived. Mayor Thorne stood at the edge of the clearing, flanked by two of his brutish men. He was smiling, a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Alara's worn but healthy appearance with an air of smug satisfaction. "Well, well," Thorne announced, his voice slicing through the morning calm. "It seems the rustic life agrees with you, my dear. The punishment has served its purpose. You look stronger." More compliant, he took a step forward, his eyes dismissing Silas as if he were a piece of furniture. "Your rehabilitation is complete. It's time to come home. I have arranged a most advantageous match for you. The son of Judge Hemlock. The union will secure my position in this territory for decades to come." Alara stared at him, horrified. This was his plan all along. This wasn't just a punishment, it was a holding pen. A place to break her spirit until she was ready to be sold for political gain. "No," she said, the word small but firm. "I am not going with you." Thorne laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You seem to be confused. You don't have a choice. You are my ward. You are my property. And I am here to collect you," he gestured to his men. "Take her." As the men moved forward, Silas stepped in front of Alara, placing his large body between her and them. He had been so quiet for so long, a man of peace born from immense pain. But now, something dangerous had awakened. The gentle hermit was gone, and in his place stood the formidable river man of the legends. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His posture, the set of his jaw, the cold fire in his gray eyes, it was a declaration of war. "Get out of my way, you pathetic brute," Thorne snarled at Silas. "She is none of your concern. You were paid to watch her, not to keep her." For the second time since she'd known him, Silas spoke a full sentence, his voice a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. "She belongs to no one." The words hung in the air, a direct challenge. Thorne's face purpled with rage. "Then you will be removed," his men charged. The clearing erupted into a chaos of violence. But this was not Thorne's manicured town, this was Silas's world. He moved with a brutal economy of motion, using his size and strength not with wild fury, but with the focused power of a river current. He deflected a blow and used the man's momentum to send him crashing into his companion. He was not just a large man, he was a man who understood leverage, balance, and the unforgiving laws of nature. Alara did not cower. The girl who had trembled in this same spot months ago was gone. She grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the fire pit, its weight familiar in her hand. As one of Thorne's men recovered and lunged at Silas from the side, she swung it with all her might, connecting with the back of his knee. He howled and crumpled to the ground. Thorne watched, his face a mask of disbelief and fury as his plan, and his men, fell apart. In a matter of moments, it was over. The two thugs were groaning on the ground, and Silas stood, breathing heavily, over them. He was bruised, a cut bleeding freely above his eye, but he was unbroken. He turned his gaze to Mayor Thorne, and for the first time, Alara saw the powerful man shrink. Defeated and humiliated, Thorn backed away, his face contorted in a venomous sneer. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice trembling with impotent rage. "I will ruin you both. I will use the law, the whole territory will come down on you." He helped his battered men to their feet, and they stumbled away, a pathetic retreat back to the world that had no power here. The threat lingered in the air, a poisonous promise. But as Alara looked at Silas, standing tall and bleeding for her, she knew she was no longer alone. The battle was over, but the war for their freedom had just begun. And this time, she had a family to fight for. The silence that descended upon the clearing was heavier than the one that had first greeted Alara. It was a silence filled with the echoes of violence and the raw, unspoken truth of what had just transpired. The sanctuary had been violated. Silas stood, his chest heaving, blood trickling from the cut on his brow into his eyebrow. He looked at the path where Thorn had disappeared, then his gaze fell to Alara. She was still holding the iron skillet, her knuckles white. He reached out, not to take it from her, but to gently touch her arm. His touch was steady, grounding. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice still rough, but laced with a profound, aching concern. She shook her head, unable to speak, her throat tight with a storm of emotions. Gratitude, fear, and a fierce, soaring pride. They did not speak of Thorn's threat. They did not need to. It was a new reality that now lived with them in the cabin. Instead, they tended to the aftermath. Alara brought a bowl of water and a clean rag, dabbing gently at the cut on Silas's face. Her hands did not tremble. His gray eyes watched her, and in them, she saw the walls of his grief finally, truly, beginning to fall. He had not just defended her, he had defended his own right to heal, his own right to have a life beyond the tragedy that had defined him for so long. When she was done, he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. In that single, shared moment of care, the last vestiges of their former roles, keeper and ward, evaporated completely. They were partners. Equals. Survivors. They spent the rest of the day reinforcing their world, not with words, but with actions. Together, they repaired the section of fence Thorn's men had crashed through. They reset the snares that had been trampled in the fight. They worked side by side, their movements falling into an easy, familiar rhythm. The cabin, which had felt threatened and exposed, began to feel like a fortress again. Not a fortress of isolation, but one of shared strength. As dusk settled, painting the river in hues of orange and purple, they sat by the fire, the warmth pushing back the chill of the evening and the lingering chill of fear. The future was uncertain. Thorn was a powerful, vengeful man. But for the first time in her life, Alara was not afraid of the future. Because for the first time, she would not be facing it alone. The man beside her, the scarred and silent river man, was no longer a symbol of her punishment. He was the architect of her freedom, and the co-founder of her new family. How often do we look at a person and see only the story we've been told? How many times do we mistake a quiet life for an empty one, or silence for an absence of strength? The world tried to tell Alara she was nothing more than property, a disobedient girl to be bartered and tamed. It tried to tell Silas he was a ghost, a broken man condemned to live forever in the shadow of his loss. But in the heart of the unforgiving wilderness, they found a different truth. They learned that family is not always the one you are born into, but the one you build, plank by plank, in the face of the storm. They discovered that true strength isn't about the power you hold over others, but the courage you find to protect them. Their story is a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, and from the deepest wounds, hope can grow. It reminds us that sometimes, the greatest punishment becomes the most profound blessing, and a person given to you as a burden can become the very reason your heart learns to beat again. If their story of resilience and redemption has touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. We believe every story holds a lesson. And for more tales that champion the unshakable power of the human spirit, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel.